Sarah Martinez was just 23 years old when her life changed forever on a Tuesday morning in Phoenix, Arizona. She worked as a nurse at the Children's Hospital downtown and was known for her bright smile and caring nature. Every morning, Sarah would stop at the same coffee shop on her way to work, ordering a vanilla latte and chatting with the friendly barista about the weather or local news. That particular morning felt different somehow. The air was crisp for October, and Sarah had woken up with an unusual heaviness in her heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but she pushed the thought aside and went about her normal routine. Her mother had always told her she was too sensitive, always picking up on things that weren't really there. Sarah's apartment was in a quiet neighborhood where she felt safe walking alone. She had lived there for 2 years since graduating from nursing school, and nothing bad had ever happened. The tree-lined streets were filled with young professionals and families, and crime was practically non-existent. Her neighbors knew her, by name, and the elderly woman next door, Mrs. Chen, always waved from her garden when Sarah left for work. As Sarah walked to her car that morning, she noticed a white van parked across the street that hadn't been there the night before. Something about it made her uncomfortable, but she told herself she was being paranoid. The van had tinted windows and she couldn't see inside. She fumbled with her keys, suddenly eager to get into her car and drive away. The moment Sarah opened her car door, she heard footsteps running behind her. Before she could turn around, strong hands grabbed her shoulders and pushed her forward. A cloth was pressed over her mouth and nose, and she smelled something sweet and chemical. Her nursing training kicked in immediately, chloroform or something similar. She tried to hold her breath, but panic made her gasp, and the world began to spin. Sarah fought as hard as she could, kicking and trying to scream, but the drug was already working. Her vision blurred, and her legs felt like water. She could hear Mrs. Chen calling her name from somewhere far away, but the sound seemed to come from underwater. The last thing Sarah remembered was being lifted into the back of the white van and seeing the worried face of her neighbor through the closing doors. When Sarah began to regain consciousness, she had no idea how much time had passed. Her head pounded, and her mouth felt dry as cotton. She was lying on a thin mattress in what appeared to be a basement or underground room. The walls were concrete, painted white, but stained with water damage and age. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows in every corner. Her hands were tied behind her back with rope that cut into her wrists when she moved. Her feet were bound at the ankles, and she was still wearing the same scrubs she had put on that morning. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The chloroform had left her throat raw and burning. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Sarah began to take in more details of her prison. There was a bucket in one corner, a folding chair near the door, and a small table with bottles of water and what looked like energy bars. The door was heavy metal with no window, and she could hear no sounds from outside. The silence was complete and terrifying. Sarah's nursing training helped her stay calm and assess her situation logically. She was alive and appeared uninjured, beyond some bruising on her arms. Her kidnappers had provided water and food, which suggested they wanted to keep her alive, at least for now. This gave her hope that she might have time to figure out how to escape or be rescued. But as the hours passed in that underground room, with no way to tell day from night, Sarah began to feel the full weight of her situation. She was completely at the mercy of people she had never seen, in a place no one would think to look for her. The rational, professional part of her mind that had helped her through nursing school and difficult shifts at the hospital began to crack under the pressure of pure terror. It was then, in her darkest moment of fear and despair, that Sarah remembered something her grandmother had taught her years ago. When faced with impossible situations, when human strength and wisdom weren't enough, there was always prayer. Sarah had been raised in a Christian household, but like many young adults, she had drifted away from regular church attendance and daily prayer. Now, tied up in a basement with no one to help her, she found herself turning back to the faith of her childhood. Sarah closed her eyes and began to pray with an intensity she had never experienced before. She prayed not just for rescue, but for strength, for wisdom, and for the safety of her family who must be worried sick about her. She prayed for her kidnappers too, asking God to change their hearts and help them see that what they were doing was wrong. As she prayed, Sarah felt a strange peace beginning to settle over her, a calm that made no logical sense given her circumstances. The first person Sarah saw was a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes who brought her food on the second day. He didn't speak to her, just set down a paper plate with a sandwich and refilled her water bottle. Sarah tried to talk to him, asking where she was and why they had taken her, but he acted as if she hadn't spoken at all. His hands shook slightly as he handled the food, and Sarah noticed he avoided looking directly at her face. As the man turned to leave, Sarah called, out desperately, "Please, I'm a nurse. I help people. I've never hurt anyone. My family must be so worried." For just a moment, the man paused at the door, his shoulders tensing. Sarah thought she saw something change in his expression, but then he was gone, the heavy door clanging, shut behind him. The second kidnapper was younger, maybe in his 30s, with dark hair and cold eyes that made Sarah's skin crawl. Unlike the older man, this one seemed to enjoy her fear. He would stand in the doorway for long minutes, just staring at her, never saying a word. Sarah tried not to show her terror when he appeared, but her heart would race uncontrollably, and she was sure he could see her hands trembling. It was the younger man who finally explained why she had been taken. On the third day, he sat down in the folding chair and looked at her with a smirk that made Sarah feel sick. "Your daddy owes some people money," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "A lot of money, and he's been avoiding payments for months now." Sarah stared at him in confusion. Her father, Roberto Martinez, owned a small auto repair shop and had always been careful with money. "That's impossible," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "My father doesn't gamble or borrow from dangerous people." "You have the wrong person." The man laughed, a sound without any warmth. "Your daddy got in deep with some loan sharks when his business was failing 2 years ago. He borrowed $50,000 to keep the shop running, and now with interest, he owes almost double that. We've been patient, but patience runs out." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process this information. 2 years ago, she remembered her father being stressed about the business, but he had never mentioned borrowing money from anyone other than the bank. Her mother had mentioned that things were tight financially, but Sarah had assumed they were, just going through a rough patch like many small business owners. "Even if that's true," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady, "taking me won't help anything. My father loves me, but he doesn't have that kind of money to pay you. This won't work." The younger man's expression hardened. "Oh, it'll work. Your daddy will find a way to get the money when he knows what happens to little girls who don't come home. We've already sent him some pictures of you all tied up down here. He knows we mean business." The casual cruelty in his voice made Sarah's stomach turn. She realized that these men saw her as nothing more than a tool, a way to pressure her father into paying a debt. Her value to them was only in the fear and desperation she could cause her family. The thought of her parents receiving photographs, of her in this basement, terrified and helpless, made her feel sick. That night, after the men had left her alone again, Sarah prayed harder than she ever had in her life. She prayed for her father, who must be going through unimaginable anguish trying to figure out how to save her. She prayed for her mother, who was probably crying herself to sleep every night. She prayed for wisdom and strength. And she prayed for a miracle. As she prayed, Sarah began to notice something strange happening. The overwhelming fear that had consumed her for the past 3 days was beginning to lift, replaced by something she could only describe as supernatural peace. It wasn't that her situation had changed. She was still tied up in a basement, still at the mercy of dangerous men. But somehow she felt less alone. Sarah found herself remembering Bible verses her grandmother had taught her as a child, words she hadn't thought about in years suddenly clear in her mind. "Fear not, for I am with you," came to her as clearly as if someone had spoken the words aloud. She remembered the story of Daniel in the lion's den, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, of all the times God had protected his people in seemingly impossible situations. The older kidnapper returned the next morning, and this time Sarah noticed something different about him. He still wouldn't meet her eyes, but his hands were shaking more than before, and he looked like he hadn't slept. When he set down her breakfast, Sarah decided to try a different approach. "What's your name?" she asked, gently, the same tone she used with frightened children at the hospital. The man froze, clearly not expecting the question. For a long moment he stood completely still, then slowly turned to look at her. "Why do you want to know?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because you're a person, not just someone who brought me here," Sarah replied. "And I think you're struggling with what you're doing. I can see it in your eyes." The man stared at her for a long moment, then sat down heavily in the folding chair. "My name is Frank," he said quietly. "And you're right. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I keep thinking about my own daughter and what I would do if someone took her." Sarah felt a flutter of hope. "Then why are you doing this, Frank?" Frank put his head in his hands. "Because I owe them money, too. Different money, but they said if I helped with this job, they'd wipe out my debt. But seeing you here, so young and scared, it's not what I thought it would be like." Sarah could see the internal battle playing out on Frank's weathered face. His confession had opened a door between them, and she knew this might be her only chance to reach him. Drawing on her experience as a nurse, where she often had to calm frightened patients and families, Sarah spoke softly and without judgment. "Frank, I can see you're a good man who got caught up in something bad," she said. "What would your daughter think if she knew what you were doing right now? What would you want someone to do if she were in my position?" Frank's shoulders began to shake, and Sarah realized he was crying. "She's only 16, he whispered. "She thinks I'm a hero. She has no idea what kind of man her father really is." "You can still be the man she thinks you are," Sarah said urgently. "It's not too late to do the right thing. Help me get out of here, and we can figure out a way to help you too. There are legal ways to deal with debt, programs that can help people. In your situation..." For a moment, Sarah thought she had reached him. Frank looked up at her with something like hope in his eyes. But then they heard footsteps on the stairs outside, and Frank jumped up from his chair, wiping his face quickly. "Don't tell Rico about this conversation," he said urgently. "He's not like me. He enjoys hurting people." Rico entered the room. A moment later, his cold eyes immediately suspicious. "What were you two talking about?" he demanded, looking from Frank to Sarah. "Nothing," Frank said quickly. "Just giving her the food." Rico studied Frank's face carefully, then shrugged. "Whatever. We got a call from the girl's father. He says he needs more time to get the money together. Boss says we give him 2 more days, then we start sending him pieces of his daughter." The casual way Rico discussed mutilating her made Sarah's blood run cold, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had spent enough time in emergency rooms to know that panic never helped anyone survive a crisis. Instead, she focused on the information Rico had accidentally revealed. There was a boss who was calling the shots, someone above these 2 men. After Rico left, Frank remained behind, pretending to clean up the food tray. "I'm sorry," he whispered without looking at her. "I'm sorry about what Rico said. I won't let them hurt you." "Then help me," Sarah urged. "You said yourself this isn't what you thought it would be like. This is your chance to do something right." Frank shook his head sadly. "You don't understand. If I cross them, they'll kill me and my daughter both. These aren't the kind of people who forgive betrayal." Sarah spent that night praying not just for her own rescue, but for Frank and his daughter. She prayed for wisdom to know what to say to reach him. And she prayed that God would protect his family too. As she prayed, she felt that same supernatural peace settling over her again, along with something else, a growing sense that God was working in ways she couldn't see. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sarah woke to the sound of multiple voices upstairs, including a woman's voice she hadn't heard before. When Frank came down with her breakfast, he looked more agitated than ever. "Who's upstairs?" Sarah asked. Frank glanced nervously toward the ceiling. "Rico's girlfriend, Maria, and the boss came by to check on things. They're discussing your father's latest message." "What did my father say?" "He's begging for more time. Says he's trying to liquidate everything he owns, but needs another week." Frank sat down in the chair, looking exhausted. "The boss isn't happy. He says your father is stalling, trying to get the police involved." Sarah felt a chill of fear. If her captors thought her father was working with law enforcement, they might decide she was too much of a liability to keep alive. "Frank, if they think my father is involving the police, what will they do to me?" Frank wouldn't meet her eyes. "I don't know," he said. But his expression told Sarah he knew exactly what they would do. That afternoon, everything changed. Sarah was dozing when she heard shouting from upstairs, followed by the sound of a door slamming so hard it shook the whole house. Heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs, and Rico burst into her room, his face twisted with rage. "Your father thinks he's smart," Rico snarled, grabbing Sarah by the shoulders and shaking her. "He went to the FBI. They raided one of our other operations this morning and arrested 3 of our guys." Sarah's heart raced, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. "I don't know anything about that. I've been down here with you." "Yeah, but Daddy Dearest has been busy while we've been babysitting you." Rico began pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "The boss is furious. He says we need to cut our losses and get rid of you before this gets any worse." Fear shot through Sarah like ice water, but even as terror threatened to overwhelm her, she felt that strange peace again. It was as if a calm voice was whispering in her mind, telling her to trust and not be afraid. She began to pray silently, asking God for protection and for Frank to find the courage to do what was right. Frank appeared in the doorway looking pale. "Rico, maybe we should wait for orders from the boss before we do anything drastic." "The orders are clear," Rico snapped. "Clean this up and disappear until things cool down. That means no witnesses." Sarah watched Frank's face carefully. She could see him struggling, his conscience warring with his fear. "Frank," she said softly, "remember what you told me about your daughter. What kind of man do you want to be for her?" Rico spun around to face her. "Shut up!" he shouted, raising his hand as if to strike her. But Frank stepped forward, catching Rico's arm. "Don't," Frank said, his voice stronger than Sarah had heard it before. "Hitting her won't solve anything." Rico stared at Frank in surprise, then slowly lowered his hand. "You're getting soft, old man. That's dangerous in our line of work." The tension in the basement room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could see that Frank was reaching a breaking point, torn between his fear of Rico and the criminal organization and his growing conscience about what they were doing to her. She knew she had to keep pushing, even though it was dangerous. "Frank, your daughter needs her father to be a hero, not a murderer," Sarah said, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "Right now, you still have a choice. You can still be the man she believes you are." Rico whirled on her, his eyes blazing. "I told you to shut up!" He pulled out a gun from his jacket, pointing it directly at Sarah's head. "One more word, and I'll blow your brains out right here." But something remarkable happened in that moment. Instead of the paralyzing terror Sarah expected to feel, she experienced an overwhelming sense of peace and protection. It was as if an invisible shield had been placed around her, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was not alone in that basement. Her grandmother's words from years ago echoed in her mind. When you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fear. No evil, for I am with you. Frank stepped between Rico and Sarah, his hands raised. Put the gun away, Rico. If we kill her now, we'll have the FBI crawling all over this place within hours. Her father already contacted them, remember? They'll be looking for her body, and when they find it, they'll find us too. Rico's hand trembled with rage, but Frank's logic seemed to get through to him. Slowly, he lowered the weapon. Then what do you suggest, genius? We can't keep her here forever, and we can't let her go. Frank was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him thinking hard. Finally, he said, "We need to contact the boss. Let him decide what to do. Maybe there's a way to negotiate with her father and the FBI, trade her safety for leniency." "You're dreaming," Rico scoffed. "The boss doesn't negotiate with cops. He eliminates problems. Then maybe it's time to eliminate the right problem," Frank said quietly, and Sarah saw something change in his eyes. It was as if he had finally made a decision that had been building inside him for days. Rico didn't catch the subtle threat in Frank's words, but Sarah did. She watched as Frank's demeanor shifted from fearful follower to determined protector. The transformation was remarkable. It was as if years of guilt and regret were crystallizing into purposeful action. "I'm going upstairs to call the boss," Rico announced. "Watch her! And Frank, don't do anything stupid while I'm gone." The moment Rico's footsteps disappeared up the stairs, Frank moved into action. He pulled a knife from his pocket and quickly cut the ropes binding Sarah's hands and feet. "We don't have much time," he whispered urgently. "Rico will be back in 5 minutes, maybe less." Sarah rubbed her wrists, trying to restore circulation to her hands. "Frank, what are you doing? If they catch you helping me—" "They're going to kill you no matter what," Frank interrupted. "I heard Rico talking to Maria earlier. The boss ordered them to get rid of you tonight and dump your body where it won't be found. I can't be part of that. I won't let my daughter grow up with a murderer for a father." Frank helped Sarah to her feet, steadying her as she swayed from days of being tied up. "There's a window in the laundry room upstairs," he said. "It's small, but you're tiny enough to fit through. Once you're outside, run to the road and flag down the first car you see." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What will happen when Rico realizes you let me go?" Frank's smile was sad but peaceful. "I'll deal with Rico. You just worry about getting to safety." As they crept up the basement stairs, Sarah could hear Rico's voice from the kitchen, speaking in angry, hushed tones on the phone. Frank led her quietly down a hallway to a small laundry room at the back of the house. The window was indeed small, set high in the wall, but Sarah thought she could squeeze through it. Frank boosted her up, and Sarah managed to unlock and open the window. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of freedom. As she prepared to climb through, she turned back to Frank. "Come with me," she whispered. "We can both get away." Frank shook his head. "Someone needs to slow Rico down, give you time to get help. Besides, I'm done running from my mistakes. It's time to face them." Sarah squeezed through the window and dropped to the ground outside. The house was in a rural area surrounded by fields and woods, with a gravel road about 100 yards away. She could see lights in the distance that looked like they might be from a gas station or convenience store. As she ran toward the road, Sarah heard shouting from inside the house. Rico had discovered her escape. She pushed herself to run faster, her legs weak from days of confinement but driven by adrenaline and desperation. Behind her, she could hear the front door of the house slam open and Rico's voice screaming Frank's name. Sarah reached the road just as a pickup truck approached from the direction of the lights she had seen. She waved her arms frantically, and the truck slowed down. An elderly man rolled down his window, taking in her disheveled appearance and obvious distress. "Please help me," Sarah gasped. "I've been kidnapped. I need you to call the police right now." The man, whose name was Bill Watson, immediately pulled over and grabbed his cell phone. As he dialed 911, Sarah looked back toward the house. She could see flashlight beams moving around the yard as Rico searched for her, but he was looking in the wrong direction. "Whoa, what's your emergency?" came the voice from Bill's phone. "This is Bill Watson on County Road 47. I've got a young woman here who says she's been kidnapped. She looks like she's been through hell." Sarah took the phone from Bill's shaking hands. "This is Sarah Martinez," she said, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. "I was kidnapped 4 days ago in Phoenix. I'm at—" She looked around for landmarks, spotting a road sign. "I'm at the intersection of County Road 47 and Miller Lane. My kidnappers are in a white farmhouse about a quarter mile down the road. One of them has a gun." The 911 operator's voice was professional but urgent. "Sarah, we've been looking for you. Multiple agencies are involved in your case. I'm dispatching units to your location immediately. Are you injured?" "I'm okay," Sarah said, though she was beginning to shake as the adrenaline wore off. "But there's a man named Frank who helped me escape. He's still in the house with the other kidnapper. Frank saved my life. Please don't let anything happen to him." Within minutes, the quiet country road was filled with flashing lights and sirens. FBI agents, local police, and paramedics arrived almost simultaneously, turning the peaceful rural area into a command center. Sarah found herself wrapped in a blanket in the back of an ambulance while a paramedic checked her vital signs and looked for signs of injury. Agent Jennifer Hayes, a veteran FBI kidnapping specialist, knelt beside Sarah in the ambulance. "Sarah, you're safe now," she said gently. "I know you've been through an ordeal, but we need to know everything you can tell us about the men who took you and the location where you were held." Sarah quickly described the layout of the farmhouse, the basement room where she had been kept, and everything she knew about Rico and Frank. She was particularly insistent about Frank's change of heart and his role in helping her escape. "Agent Hayes, Frank saved my life," Sarah emphasized. "Without him, I would be dead right now. Rico was planning to kill me tonight. Frank risked everything to help me get away." Agent Hayes nodded, taking notes on everything Sarah said. "We'll take that into account, Sarah. Right now, our priority is securing the scene and making sure no one else gets hurt." Through the ambulance windows, Sarah could see tactical teams moving toward the farmhouse. Bright spotlights illuminated the building, and she could hear amplified voices calling for the occupants to come out with their hands up. The professionalism and coordination of the law enforcement response was impressive, but Sarah couldn't help worrying about Frank. Suddenly, gunshots rang out from the direction of the house. Sarah's heart clenched with fear. "Frank," she whispered, trying to stand up despite the paramedics' attempts to keep her lying down. Agent Hayes placed a gentle but firm hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Stay here. Let us handle this." The gunshots continued, sporadically for several minutes, echoing across the fields. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed harder than she ever had, asking God to protect Frank and the law enforcement officers who were risking their lives. She prayed that no one else would die because of her kidnapping. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the shooting stopped. Sarah watched anxiously as several figures emerged from the farmhouse, but in the darkness and chaos, she couldn't tell who was who. An ambulance raced past them toward the house, its sirens wailing. Agent Hayes returned to Sarah's side, her expression grim. "We've secured the scene," she reported. "Rico Martinez, not related to you, different family, was killed in the shootout. He refused to surrender and opened fire on our agents. Frank Kowalski was wounded, but he's alive. He's being transported to the hospital now." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully, she began to cry. "Is Frank going to be okay?" "The paramedics think so. He took a bullet in the shoulder, probably from Rico, before our people got to him. He's conscious and asking about you." Sarah wiped her tears and looked at Agent Hayes earnestly. "What will happen to Frank now? I meant what I said. He saved my life. Without him, I never would have escaped." "That will all be taken into consideration," Agent Hayes assured her. Frank's cooperation and his role in helping you escape will definitely factor into any decisions about prosecution. For now, let's focus on getting you checked out at the hospital and reunited with your family. The ride to Phoenix General Hospital was surreal for Sarah. After 4 days in a basement with no contact with the outside world, the simple act of moving through the city at night felt like a miracle. She watched the familiar streetlights and buildings pass by, each one a reminder that she was really free. Her parents were waiting at the hospital when the ambulance arrived. Sarah's mother, Elena Martinez, collapsed in tears when she saw her. Daughter and her father, Roberto, looked like he had aged 10 years in 4 days. The family reunion in the emergency room was emotional beyond words. "Mija, we thought we'd lost you forever," Roberto whispered, holding Sarah as if he might never let her go again. "I'm so sorry this happened because of my mistakes." Sarah looked up at her father, seeing the guilt and anguish in his eyes. "Dad, what Rico told me about the debt, is it true?" Roberto nodded shamefully. 2 years ago, when the shop was failing, I was desperate. I borrowed money from the wrong people instead of asking family for help. I was too proud, too embarrassed. I thought I could handle it myself. Why didn't you tell me what was happening? When they demanded payment? I was trying to protect you and your mother. I thought if I could just get enough money together, I could make this whole nightmare go away without involving you. Roberto's voice broke. Instead, I made everything worse. I almost got you killed. Sarah took her father's hands in hers. "Dad, look at me. I'm alive. I'm safe. And somehow, through all of this horror, I think God was working to bring something good out of it." Later that evening, after Sarah had been examined by doctors and given a clean bill of health, Agent Hayes returned with an update on Frank's condition. He was in stable condition after surgery to remove the bullet from his shoulder, and he was asking to see Sarah. "I'd like to see him too," Sarah told her parents. "I need to thank him properly." Frank's hospital room was under guard, but the officers allowed Sarah and her parents to visit. Frank looked older and more fragile lying in the hospital bed, but his eyes were clear and peaceful in a way Sarah hadn't seen before. "Sarah," Frank said as she approached his bedside. "Thank God you're all right. I was so worried when I heard the shooting." "Frank, you saved my life," Sarah said simply. "I don't know how to thank you for finding the courage to do what was right." Frank managed a weak smile. "I should be thanking you. You reminded me who I wanted to be, who my daughter needed me to be. I spent so many years making bad choices and hurting people. Helping you escape was the first truly good thing I've done in a very long time." Sarah's father stepped forward. "Mr. Kowalski, I understand you were in debt to the same people who took my daughter. I want you to know that if there's anything I can do to help you start over when this is all finished, you just need to ask." Frank's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Martinez, after what I did to your family, I don't deserve your kindness." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Roberto replied. "Sarah told me you have a daughter. She needs her father to come home to her." 6 months after her rescue, Sarah stood in a courtroom as Frank Kowalski was sentenced for his role in her kidnapping. Thanks to his cooperation with the FBI and his testimony against the larger criminal organization, along with Sarah's powerful statement about how he had saved her life, Frank received a reduced sentence of 2 years in minimum security prison. Agent Hayes had explained to Sarah that without Frank's information, they never would have been able to dismantle the loan shark operation that had terrorized so many families. His detailed knowledge of their operations led to the arrest of 15 people, including the boss, who had ordered Sarah's death. "Your Honor," Sarah had said during her victim impact statement, "Frank Kowalski participated in a terrible crime against me and my family. But when faced with the choice between doing evil and doing good, he chose good. He risked his own life to save mine. I believe people can change, and Frank proved that even in the darkest circumstances, it's never too late to do the right thing." Frank's 16-year-old daughter, Katie, was in the courtroom that day. After the sentencing, she approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Miss Martinez, I want you to know that my dad has been different since the night you were rescued," Katie said. "He used to be angry all the time, always worried about money and debt, but now he talks about second chances and making things right. Even though he has to go to prison, I'm proud of him for the first time in years." Sarah hugged the teenager. "Your father is a hero, Katie. Never forget that." Through a victim assistance program, Sarah had stayed in touch with Frank during the months leading up to his trial. She visited him in county jail several times, and they had developed an unlikely friendship based on their shared experience of God working in impossible circumstances. "I keep thinking about that night in the basement," Frank told her during one visit. "When you talked to me about my daughter and about doing the right thing, it was like a voice speaking directly to my soul. I've never experienced anything like that before," Sarah smiled. "That was God working through prayer, Frank. When I was tied up down there, I wasn't just praying for myself. I was praying for you too, asking God to change your heart and show you the right path." Frank nodded slowly. "I started going to the prison chapel services. The chaplain says that God can use even our worst mistakes to bring about good if we let him. I never believed that before, but now I think I'm starting to understand." Sarah's own faith had been transformed by her ordeal. She had always believed in God intellectually, but the experience of feeling his presence so powerfully during her darkest moments had changed everything. She began attending church regularly, again, and volunteering with a ministry that helped families of crime victims. The criminal organization that had terrorized her family was completely dismantled within 8 months of her rescue. Her father's debt was forgiven as part of the federal prosecution agreement, and Roberto was able to focus on rebuilding his auto repair business without fear. He used the experience to start a support group for other small business owners who had fallen victim to predatory lending. "Sarah showed all of us that even in the worst situations, God hasn't abandoned us," Roberto would tell the other business owners. Her prayers didn't just save her life. They saved our whole family and helped bring down the criminals who were destroying our community. Sarah returned to her job at the children's hospital, but she found that her experience had made her an even more effective nurse. When she encountered frightened children or worried parents, she had a depth of understanding about fear and hope that she had never possessed before. One day, almost a year after her rescue, Sarah received a letter from Frank's daughter, Katie. The teenager was now in her senior year of high school and had been accepted to college with plans to study social work. "Dear Miss Martinez," the letter read, "I wanted you to know that my dad gets out of prison in 8 months, and he's already been accepted into a job training program for ex-offenders that your father helped set up. He talks about you all the time and says you gave him his life back. I used to be ashamed of my father, but now I tell everyone about how he saved your life. You helped him remember who he really was inside. I want to help people the way you helped my dad, so I'm going to study social work and maybe work with families in crisis. Thank you for showing us that people can change and that God can work miracles even in terrible situations." Sarah kept Katie's letter on her refrigerator, reading it whenever she needed a reminder of how God could bring good out of the worst circumstances. She had started speaking at churches and community groups about her experience, sharing the message. That prayer could change not just situations, but hearts. Frank was released from prison after serving 18 months with good behavior. Sarah and her family were there to meet him at the prison gates, along with Katie and several members of the church that had been supporting them. Frank had used his time in prison to earn his GED and complete a vocational training program in electrical work. "I have a job lined up and a place to live," Frank told Sarah as they stood outside the prison. "But more than that, I have hope for the first time in years. You taught me that it's never too late to become the person God wants you to be." 3 years after her kidnapping, Sarah was invited to speak at a national conference on trauma recovery. She stood before an audience of hundreds of counselors, therapists, and victims' advocates, sharing her story of how prayer had not only sustained her through a terrifying ordeal, but had actually transformed the heart of one of her captors. People often ask me if I'm angry about what happened to me, Sarah told the audience. The truth is, I wouldn't choose to go through that experience again, but I can't deny the incredible good that came from it. My kidnapping led to the arrest of 15 criminals who were terrorizing families across 3 states. It restored my relationship with God and gave me a deeper appreciation for every day of freedom. It brought my family closer together and taught my father that pride isn't worth more than family safety. She paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. But most importantly, it proved to me that God can reach anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances. When I was praying in that basement, I wasn't just asking God to save me. I was asking Him to work in the hearts of my captors. Frank Kowalski is now a productive member of society, a loving father, and a strong Christian who mentors other ex-offenders. His daughter is graduating from college next month with a degree in social work. That transformation started with prayer in the darkest place I've ever been. After her speech, a young woman approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "My brother is in prison right now for armed robbery," the woman said. "I've been so angry with him, I stopped visiting or even taking his calls. But after hearing your story, I think maybe I should start praying for him instead of just writing him off." Sarah smiled and took the woman's hands. "Prayer changes everything," she said. "Not always in the ways we expect, but always in the ways we need. Your brother needs to know that someone believes he can change. Sometimes that's where miracles begin." As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the incredible journey that had started with the worst day of her life. Her kidnapping had been a nightmare, but it had also been the beginning of a deeper understanding of faith, forgiveness, and the power of prayer to transform even the most hopeless situations. She had learned that God could use even the cruelest circumstances to bring about redemption and healing. Frank now worked as an electrician and volunteered at a halfway house for men transitioning out of prison. His relationship with his daughter had been completely restored, and Katie often said her father was her hero. The family attended the same church as Sarah and her parents, and Frank frequently shared his testimony about how God had used a young nurse's prayers to save his soul. Sarah never forgot the lesson she learned in that basement. That prayer wasn't just about asking God to change circumstances, but about asking Him to work in human hearts. She had prayed for her captors, not knowing if it would make any difference, but trusting that God could reach anyone. The transformation in Frank's life was proof that no one was beyond redemption, and that even in the darkest moments, God was, working in ways she couldn't see or understand. The white farmhouse where Sarah had been held was eventually torn down, but the field where it stood became something beautiful. Katie Kowalski organized a community garden there as her senior project, growing vegetables to donate to local food banks. It seemed fitting that a place where evil had once flourished now nourished families in need. Sarah's story became a powerful testimony to the reality that prayer could indeed change everything, transforming not just the person praying, but reaching across the barriers of fear and hatred to touch the hearts of those who seemed unreachable. Her kidnapping had lasted only 4 days, but the ripple effects of what God did in that basement continued to spread years later, touching lives and changing hearts in ways she was still discovering.